Welcome everyone to our monthly webinar series where we are speaking with my really great friend, Gabrielle Korn. We're going to be talking about her journey and her path over the last, let's couple of decades. But before we get into that, as this is a legal panel, I do need to say that all of the information we provide today is just for informational purposes. Nothing should be construed as being legal advice or be taken as legal advice. And if you do have any questions about anything we bring up today on the legal end and you want to speak with us, by all means, please feel free to reach out to myself and Lorena, who's also on today's webinar, and we're happy to chat. But without further ado, I would love to introduce my friend Gabrielle Korn to the stage. And before I let her say anything, I'm going to read from her bio because I know if I did this off the top of my head, I would forget one of the many, many things that I should be listing out for her. Gabrielle is the author of 3 books, about to be 4, I think we can say that now, and the former editor-in-chief of Nylon Media. Her debut memoir, Everybody Else is Perfect, was named the #1 LGBTQ plus book of the year by Oprah Magazine and the best Jewish memoir of the year by Hey Alma. Her second book, the dystopian science fiction novel Yours for the Taking, was an Indie Next Pick and a New York Times Best Book of the Month. Its recent sequel, The Shutouts, has been called another winner by Publishers Weekly and a perfect blend of sadness and hope by Kirkus. Her writing has appeared across the internet for 15 years with bylines in Elle, McSweeney's, The Millions, Literary Hub, In Style, Refinery 29, Oprah Magazine, Autostraddle, and more, as well as several anthologies. She lives in LA with her wife, where together they run the Pink Door Artist and Writer Residency. Gabrielle, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, absolutely our pleasure. And the reason I wanted you to speak with us today is, as a lawyer, I get a lot of really great snapshots into people's careers at certain points. Someone will come to me with a problem, we'll hopefully solve it, and then sometimes I'll never hear from them again for at least 2, 3 years. I've had the absolute privilege of working side by side with you at Nylon close to 8 years ago now, if not 9. And then got to kind of hang out and see you progress through your career over the last almost decade or so. So I thought it would be excellent to bring you in here, sort of talk about your experiences. Of course, pepper it with what everybody's really here for, all the legal stuff, because that's by far way more exciting than, the actual work. And then get some questions from the audience, because I'm sure they're going to have many. And just to explain what we're going to dive into today, we're going to be talking about what I see as an interconnected part of your career, but could probably be seen by some folks as 2 facets. One is your work on the digital end and your work in the more traditional publishing side of the world. So before I start asking you questions, I would love to hear how you got your career start, but more importantly, sort of what was the impetus behind you getting into the media space, and what pushed you into it however many years ago?
Honestly, it wasn't as intentional as it might seem in hindsight. I just knew that I wanted to write. And you know, I didn't have any professional creatives in my family. I didn't know what that path could look like. And I feel like I was just kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what would work. And by my senior year of college, I had landed an internship at a small publishing company called the Feminist Press. And it was just really lucky timing. One of their authors was the editor-in-chief of an independent feminist journal. And when I was graduating, she needed an assistant. And my intern supervisor recommended me. And so out of college, I became an editorial assistant at a very small magazine. And it wasn't like the world's best job, but I really liked it and I felt like I was good at it. And so I felt like, oh, maybe this is the path.
And so I know you ended up in Nylon, maybe a few years after that. And around the time I started there as well, I know they made a really interesting move, taking what was traditionally a print publication and going digital only. So I would love to hear about sort of how you ended up in the role you ended up in and talk about what that transition looked like and what your goals were at the time and whether retrospectively you think those were achieved.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I started in 2014. I came on as a senior editor. I had been at Refinery 29 before that, and they had hired someone from the entertainment team at Refinery to run digital. And she ended up hiring me to come with her to work right under her. And when we got there, it was it was a really interesting change of pace. Like Refinery was kind of run like boot camp, and Nylon was run like a summer camp with no adults. Like you should have seen it. Sometimes I wish you could have seen what the office was like before you started. It was like all of the digital people like packed into one tiny room, and then the magazine in like this beautiful open space with everybody had a dedicated desk, and they didn't let me see the office before I accepted the job. So it was a real shock coming in. And when I started, the website mostly existed to support the work of the print mag. So we were putting their articles online. We were sometimes writing up little news stories, but mostly it was like social media and then just figuring out how to give the existing stories a second life.
What did social media promotion look like in 2014 and 2015?
It was different. A, it was only a couple of years into Facebook allowing links. So, like, all of a sudden, .coms were getting traffic from social media, which sounds really basic, but it was quite revolutionary. And it was like what what we were experiencing at that time was like the death of the homepage. Before social, if you loved a website, if you loved Nylon, you would go to nylon.com. And after, you would follow it on social and click the links. So, like in industry speak, people were no longer coming through the front door. We had to lure them in with the strength of the headlines. And so, this very quickly devolved into what became known as clickbait, like trying to figure out how to get people to the website. And it just wasn't happening with the stories from print. Those were really beautiful works of long form journalism that were meant to be held in your hand, and it's just kind of not the same online. Like you need something much grabbier to get the casual reader in. And of course, it's different when you have a newsletter because newsletter followers are a little bit more engaged than what was at the time Facebook followers. Um, but still it was a lot to figure out and learn. And so what was interesting is that because the digital director came from entertainment, she was very focused on using entertainment news to grow the website. And it was an effective strategy, but the problem was it diluted the brand of the magazine. And so we started having the website and the magazine going in two very different directions, which was the magazine kind of stayed indie and the website became more mainstream because we had to hit numbers that are just not possible when you remain niche. And that person eventually left. I became the digital director and I worked really, really hard to try to unite the two brands and figure out how do we approach digital in a way that still feels authentic to what people come to Nylon for. I did not think about it as print versus digital, which I think in hindsight was pretty naive. I didn't understand why the magazine editors weren't more keen to help us. But there was a certain kind of preciousness about the things that went in print, and the digital team was kind of treated like the redheaded stepchild of the company. And that was really, really frustrating to me because I was like, we all should have the same goal. Like if the website does well, it benefits the magazine. Like, but we just couldn't bridge the gap. Um, and then the magazine went away and their whole team was laid off and my
Yeah.
team was all that was left. And at that point I realized, oh, we had been in a race. And I wasn't aware of the conversations happening behind the scenes. I wasn't aware of how dire it was.
And so was that decision made really without your input at all? It just sort of had
Oh,
happened there.
of course. I was as shocked as anybody. And I think there was a perception that I had been involved in the decision, but I
Mhm.
think what a lot of people don't realize is that like just because you're in a leadership position doesn't mean you're given any visibility into anything real, you know? Like I was not part of the inner circle of the owners, but I was asked to run the company as though it was mine. So it was like I was doing this work and making these decisions without all of the information, which was really hard.
Well, I know having seen you in the role, you might not have had all of the power behind the scenes, but you certainly were controlling the direction of the magazine as a whole and what it was focusing on. And certainly by the time I joined in 2017, there was a big push on your end towards queer inclusivity and body positivity and things that maybe were being ignored by what we would call, I don't know, mainstream Hollywood ethos. I'd love to hear about your decision to push for that and really what the response was like, especially given that this was a legacy brand that had been around for a couple decades at that point.
Yeah, this was my biggest bone to pick with the magazine was this over reliance on featuring skinny, straight white women. Um, it was this very kind of like early aughts understanding of like coolness that just was so offensive to me and just felt so exclusionary and also boring. Like the worst part of I don't know, it was just like monotonous. And so when it was up to me, it was the first thing I wanted to change because first of all, it was the right thing to do. But also, if you're trying to make something diverse and cool for a diverse and cool audience, like what you're giving them has to reflect them. And I kept meeting people while the magazine was running saying who would say like yeah I want to love nylon but it's for white girls like or it's for straight girls or it's for skinny girls like almost nobody felt like it was for them because this idealized image of womanhood that they were projecting was just completely out of touch with reality. And we were trying to attract Gen Z, and Gen Z was really like savvy and hip, and they weren't going to just accept what was given to them. So it was like, in order to grow and evolve, it it was just not optional and it was really really rewarding and I approached it as kind of like a two-pronged problem so both external and internal we had to address the diversity of the staff and the freelancers we were using and then we had to address the diversity of the people we were featuring so it didn't happen overnight it took a lot of work but I kind of think it's what saved us. Like it's what made nylon remain relevant was that we opened it up to all kinds of people and kind of like de-attached the idea of coolness from a certain kind of body.
Yeah, I remember coming in and it definitely felt like you were a year or two ahead of the curve with that
Thank
stuff. So
you.
inevitably, I would imagine had some influence on where things were going. Um, let's talk about me jumping in at a certain point. I had been working with a company called Socialite, which was an influencer management company, and didn't realize for the first couple months that Nylon was literally sharing the office next door. And recall one day someone asking if I could help out with a contract there, and that very quickly turned into us working together pretty much every other day. I
Yeah.
had you dealt hand in hand with legal before?
No, absolutely not.
Tell me about what that's like, and I want you to tell me about what that's like because this is sort of a key thing that comes up in these talks and generally when I'm out there speaking with sort of creative professionals and artists, which is like, how do you even work with legal and make sure that they're not just a giant obstacle getting in your way saying no? So I'd love to hear about that. And you can divorce me personally from it and talk about legal in general if you want as well, if that just
Yeah,
makes sense.
I mean, it's so funny. Before you got there, someone told me, and this was maybe an exaggeration, but someone in finance told me that we were losing tens of thousands of dollars a month because of copyright infringement, because nobody knew the protocol for what images we could use. And so they just factored it into the budget instead of setting up a system where we wouldn't be breaking the law.
Yeah, and I will say back in that era of social media, nobody really knew what copyright infringement was when it came to sharing images, particularly from Instagram.
Yeah.
So it was a weird time, and this is not a nylon specific thing. I think the I've worked with a number of different journalistic offices and media outlets, and I think every single time I've sat down with their team of journalists, there's always this fight of, hey, if it's on social media and I credit them, isn't that sufficient? And the answer is very clearly no. Which, yeah, I'll just say maybe there is some truth to your comment from the accounting team that they made.
Yeah, and when you started working with us, I was scared because we had been so scrappy and so DIY for such a long time. And you came in with process and rules and contracts. And then once we started getting to know each other, I felt this huge sense of relief because you were there to protect us from ourselves. And nobody had done that before. And so I didn't realize the amount of anxiety I had been carrying around, just kind of hoping that we weren't doing anything wrong, but with no real way to know. And I remember being unsure if you were there to support us or if you were there to protect the owners from us, kind of like an HR situation. But you very quickly made it clear that you were there for everybody. And I remember you constantly pointing out things that we needed contracts for, and it was great, and I learned a lot. And I at one point you urged me to do a diversity training for the whole staff after we had some kind of inter-team offended parties. And so I did it, but you were really like the force behind making that happen.
Great. I don't even remember that, but that, that sounds like great advice. Let's talk about leaving Nylon. Kind of what happened there. I know you next ended up at Netflix, but before we get to Netflix, let's talk about what happened between. Tell me briefly your experience leaving, why you left, what happened there.
Yeah, so Nylon got acquired by Bustle. And I did not like the way it was handled. I found out at 6 o'clock in the morning, about an hour before everybody else did. And there was a press release that went out at the same time saying that Bustle has acquired Nylon. Editor-in-chief Gabrielle Korn is staying on. And this went out before anybody had had a conversation with me about whether I was staying on. Half of my team was laid off. And overnight, we went from being in this beautiful little boutique office to what really felt like a content farm. Like, this huge room with every digital property occupying one table. And it just didn't feel right. And so they offered me a deal, which was basically they already had an editor-in-chief that they had hired to be across all of their acquired brands. So they didn't want me to keep my title. And they said, you can be the editor at large for 6 months and train our editor-in-chief on your job. And at the end of 6 months, we'll find a place for you on another team. And that was the first time I hired a lawyer. Um, and the lawyer was I didn't realize how much a lawyer is like a therapist and a coach, and like it was so amazing to have someone who was just looking out for me. And we talked through every possible scenario, and he was basically like, look, like they're not going to keep you on. Like they will most likely keep you for 6 months to learn all of your secrets and then lay you off. Like, why would they keep you on? And so we decided together that what I was going to do was quit and ask for a payout because I mean, my reasoning was like, you've eliminated my position. this is a layoff. I would like severance. And the problem was to get the severance, I would have to sign an NDA. And I had just gotten my first book deal to write a memoir. And if I signed the NDA, I wouldn't be able to say anything disparaging about nylon or bustle. And the lawyer really didn't want me to take the money. And he just kept saying, like, you're a writer. You cannot sacrifice your voice. It is the most important thing you have. Like, please don't do it. And I was so freaked out about money that I didn't listen to him and I took the deal and, you know, cut 40 pages from the memoir. And
Yeah.
so then I left.
To be clear, I was not the lawyer in this
No,
situation.
Adam was not the
Gabrielle,
lawyer.
yes. But looking back at that now, that was obviously an incredibly difficult decision to make.
Yeah.
Do you stand by the decision you made? Would you do it differently with having sort of the information you have today and the experience you have today?
Yes, absolutely. I wish that I had had more faith in my own ability to make money, but I had never been, I mean, well, I had been freelance before, but when I was much younger, I just didn't think I could pull it off. Um, and I had just moved into this huge new apartment because I had recently gotten a raise. And I just felt really backed into a corner and I had no perspective on it. And it's like in those moments, I think it's so easy to get so in the moment and only think about the next 3 months. But like when you sign something like that, that's the rest of your life. Um, so I think in hindsight, I would have been fine, you know, like I got a new job in 3 months anyway. So, yeah.
And it's tough. And, you know, this is really, it's not just for artists and folks in the creative space, but like this is the fundamental question you get whenever you're given an offer by a bigger entity. It's like, do you take the money and the comfort, but the loss of the versus the loss of opportunity? And it's really difficult to bank on yourself when you don't have years of experience to back it up and support that. I will say your lawyer was speaking from his experience seeing I don't know how many other clients in similar situations. And that is something that is unique to not just to lawyers, but to really any sort of advisor, business sort of advisor, which agreed, we operate like therapists sometimes, but so much of it is business therapy where it's like, this is what we've seen before. These are the tools that work, but it is so difficult to just take somebody's word on it and trust it.
Yeah.
So
And
unfortunately, we learn a lot of these experiences just by having gone through it.
totally. And one thing he said that kind of haunts me was the book will do better if you can talk about what really happened to you.
Sure.
And I think he was right. Because after that, the book had to become more of a memoir and less of like what I wanted it to be, which was like a gossipy workplace magazine story.
It's possible. It's hard to say. We'll never
Yeah, we'll
know.
never know.
Let's jump on to your next role, which you mentioned was you got into a role at Netflix, which I remember you telling me about it, and I had no idea this role even existed.
Yeah,
So
well, so first I did end up going back to Refinery 29. I stayed there for about a year and then and was miserable. And then Netflix like descended from the heavens with this dream role, which was to be in charge of LGBT strategy on social media. And basically, what they were doing at the time was creating identity-based platforms, hiring former journalists to run them, and trying to create micro fan communities for the Netflix content that spoke to those communities. And so it was like, it was about building brand loyalty with marginalized audiences to try to increase visibility for that content and that talent.
and is this a strategy you've seen in the past, like where building a base on social media results in building a strong audience on a completely different platform?
It was happening a lot at the time. Refinery 29 was doing it as well. They had a separate website for Black women. They had just launched a separate one for the Latinx audience. And interestingly, those two things were the most profitable part of their business. They had like huge advertising deals coming in. And so it made a lot of sense to me, especially because I think that when audiences who are marginalized communities see content that's made for them, they can be the most vocal champions of that content. And like famously, I do think that queer people have a lot of power on social media. I think that like queer culture does generally become mainstream culture. So in that moment, I think it was really smart to feed the beast, so to speak.
I get that. I feel like 90% of the memes that I circulate are from queer culture at some point. We can trace it back to that.
Totally. And
Um,
I think the problem with it is that those people are people, not corporations. So the challenge was don't sound like a corporation.
well, tell us about that switch. How did you adapt your skills coming from, more traditional editorial media to this social promotional space? What changed? What were you able to take and adapt, and what did you have to drop completely?
Well, I really quickly realized that there's this major misunderstanding between marketing folks and editorial folks, which is both industries use the word editorial and it means very different things for each job, but marketing people think it's the same thing. So they were basically like, we're hiring you to do editorial. And it wasn't editorial. It was,
Can you explain the two different distinction or the distinction between the
yeah,
two?
I mean, editorial in journalism is writing. Period. Editorial in marketing means editorializing promotional materials, but it's still promotional materials. So basically, we
What's the goal in one versus the other?
editorial journalism is storytelling about whatever the story is. It's reported, it's researched, it's about the truth. Um, Marketing is about a product. And so editorializing is a smart way to do marketing because it's more engaging, but it's still marketing. So I figured that out after I took the job. But it still felt like a worthwhile challenge. Not least because they had tripled my salary and moved me to LA, and it was a, very fancy package that made my life significantly better. And there was this huge opportunity, which was we were supposed to be promoting queer content to the queer audience, but there was not enough queer content to fill our quotas. So my idea was let's start creating our own content for social to kind of create the appearance of a robust content slate and just keep the audience engaged so that when we do have content, they're already paying attention and, playing with us.
Do you feel like you achieved that?
Yeah,
Great.
but it wasn't what they wanted me to do.
What did they want you to do by contrast?
They wanted us to be the queer extension of Netflix. They did not want us to do anything that did not directly tie back to Netflix. And so even though we were growing and fans loved us, it we were starting to have our own opinions that didn't line up with the opinions coming from content. And I understand objectively why that's not the right goal. But it's like that's what you get when you put a bunch of former journalists into marketing roles.
Fair
When
enough.
we had no marketing training.
Yeah, that was an interesting play. Although I remember you putting out some really entertaining stuff back in the day. before we jump into the exact present day with where you're at, because it will be a shift in a second, I would love to hear just sort of your parting thoughts on the state of not journalism as a whole, because I think that's a topic for probably another day, but maybe just digital journalism and digital editorial, where it's at now, what you see doing well, and what feels like has gone more or less extinct in the last few years.
I think that the mistake that editorial platforms made was trying to grow their audiences by being everything to everyone. I think that the vanity metrics of unique views and page views, which were largely created for advertisers, led to this great kind of like blandification of content. And when you lose your core audience, you lose everybody. And so it felt really inevitable to me watching it happen. I saw it at Nylon, I saw it at Refinery. And so I think what's happening now is really interesting, which is a return to more niche platforms and publications because there's nothing like a fan base. There's nothing like making niche content for a small group of people who will be really, really engaged. And I think people are finding that that is much more worthwhile than a huge audience with mid enthusiasm. So I think places like Substack are
Yeah.
really interesting. I think newsletters are great. And I think like if you have a newsletter platform with 1,000 subscribers who hang on your every word, and you post a link and say you have to buy this thing, and 70% of them click on it, it's probably more than a bigger newsletter with a less engaged audience would do. So that's really fun to watch. I've been interested to see like new little kind of literary and art print magazines pop up again. I think young people are nostalgic. I think they have missed out on the era of like covering your bedroom wall with magazine clippings. And so, everything is on a 20-year trend cycle. So I do hope that we get magazines back, but I more than that, I hope that we get reading back. Like I think that social media has really disrupted people's ability to read, and I hope that what we're seeing is people figuring out how to get back to reading, and the medium matters less to me.
Great. Yeah, no, I'm seeing the exact same stuff with Substacks, and this really feels like the last year and a half has been the era of the subscribe newsletter, which is
Yeah,
phenomenal, getting out to
yeah,
people. And we see with our clients, the folks that are creating new small media companies are doing really well because they're niching themselves and they're finding a phenomenal, really fervent audience. And looking back at the mistakes of all of our precursors, it's don't grow too fast. It seems to be something that people need to remember these days because, like you said, expanding out and trying to cover everything too quickly is probably a recipe for failure these days.
yeah, exactly.
But let's turn to where you're at today. Talking about reading. Yeah, reading's pretty important. But you've shifted a little bit out of journalism into something a little more traditional. Tell us where you're at, and I'd love to have you just make your announcement of what is getting released in the not too distant future. That was just announced last month. So please, I'll cede the floor to you. Tell us what you've
Yeah.
been working on.
So, um, by the time I left Netflix, I had signed my first deal for a novel. And leaving that job, I just had this feeling like if I don't take the opportunity to try to see if I can become a full-time writer now, I'll never do it and I'll regret it. So I started freelancing and writing. And at this point, my brand work has kind of slipped away and I have become a full-time author. And it really feels like a lifelong dream. I feel really lucky and really grateful. I've had 3 books come out, and I recently sold my fourth book, a novel called Long Island Girls, that's coming out in June of next year. And in the meantime, I've been doing things like ghostwriting and one-on-one manuscript editing, which I really, really love. It's good to remember that I did spend a decade of my life as an editor. And I really like helping aspiring writers get their books into good shape. So I it feels a little nuts because my first book came out in 2021. So it'll basically be 4 books in 5 years. Which, I went from someone with no books to someone who I feel like I can't get them out fast enough. So it's been really exciting.
That's amazing. Going back to your heyday working in college, like getting into journalism, was becoming a fully published author a thought before that, or was this something that came organically out through your career?
I wanted to be an author so badly for my whole life. And then I didn't have any ideas. Like I mean, I took creative writing classes all through college, and I really struggled with what to say. And I think I just hadn't lived enough life. Like all of my short stories were just about like girls like me, like dating in college and like, it just there was just no there. And I wanted to make money more than I wanted to see it through. And so I put it on hold. And then with my first book, I was very fortunate in that a literary agent reached out to me after seeing my writing online, and it was her idea to do a book of essays. And the book of essays was very easy because it felt like an extension of what I was doing every day. And then after it came out, I felt really proud of it, but it still felt slightly off center from what I really wanted to do, which was write novels. And and then I realized that time moves forward and I wasn't getting any younger. And if I didn't write the novel, I wouldn't write the novel.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but your upcoming novel actually is about kind of a facsimile of your dating life in college.
No, it's totally fiction.
Fair enough, but you're drawing from some experience to get
Well,
there.
I am from Long Island.
Yeah,
So I tried to write from a place of emotional truth.
yeah,
So I put a lot of feelings into it that are really real. I put a lot of lessons that I've learned into it. But it's not autofiction. It's
got
not
it.
me. It's not my life. I think if anything, it's almost like how in a dream every character is you. Like in this novel, every character is a part of me, but they're
What
on their own journey.
what shifted for you to get the confidence to go, I can write about something like this? Because I know, your last 2 books were science fiction. That's far more artificial in some respects. What made you tell yourself like it's time for me to just write a story about things that I can speak to, maybe through some connection to my real life? Obviously, it's fictional, but there's nothing fantastic or necessarily outlandish from it aside from just the straight story that you're going to put in there.
So the books didn't happen linearly. I wrote the first draft of Long Island Girls right when I left Netflix. So Yours for the Taking was already done. And actually, a friend of mine had recommended that I read The Writer's Journey, which is a book about writing the hero's journey for screenplays, because I was like, I'm in LA, I'm going to become a screenwriter. And so a screenwriter friend was like, just read this book. Like, you don't need to take a class. So I wrote the first chapter of Long Island Girls as an exercise in hero's journey structure to see, because I was like, this structure is unfamiliar to me. Let me write something that feels really familiar, set, in my hometown with just things that I understand, so that I don't have to do research. And then by the time I finished that chapter, I was like, oh God, it's a novel. Like I could see the next 20 years of the life of the characters. And so then I sent it to my editor, and she was basically like, this is great, but I thought we talked about a sequel. So like, can you just write a sequel? So I shelved it and then I wrote the shutouts.
Got it. Let's take a step back. You mentioned getting an agent. And I will tell you, I work with lots of folks in the literary space. And the number one question I get from authors who are just retaining me is, can you help me find a literary agent? And usually the answer is no, because they are very difficult to secure. And
Yeah.
not only are they difficult to find, it's really difficult to find one that meshes really well with you as an author. But you said someone reached out to you, they cold emailed you
Yeah.
or DM'd you. Tell us about your experiences there and what it's like to work with an agent, because I think that's a very odd concept for a lot of folks.
Totally. I mean, it was like winning the lottery. It was so, so nice. But I think I think what I could have done is taken the fact that one person was interested and used it to query widely. And and instead I just said yes. And honestly, she was a great agent. Like she believed in me. She wanted me to have a literary career. She got me a really good deal for my first book deal at Atria, which is a Simon and Schuster imprint. So I was immediately at a top five publisher. Um, and we were together for a long time. I think 6 or 7 years total. And at a certain point, like things evolve and you want something different. And so we did end up parting ways a few months ago. So I am actually querying agents for the first time in my career, which is it feels really funny to email people and be like, I'm seeking representation for my fifth book. And it's really stressful and scary, and I can't believe how lucky I am that I haven't had to do it until this point.
Right. I would reframe that. I wouldn't say that you're necessarily lucky that you didn't have to do it that way, because I think working with any sort of artist that deals with representation, one of the things I tell them is like learn to pitch yourself and to sell yourself. And sometimes it is going out of your way to find an agent or a manager or someone or a sales agent or something like that. And that's okay too. And it's really a part of the job, which is if you do such a phenomenal job of pouring your heart and your mind onto page, you should be able to kind of rework that skill into selling yourself a little bit. And on top of that, the reason it is so important, like you said, to query and go around and really kick the tires with agents is those relationships are so crucial to get right. And you need
Yeah.
to know that whoever you're working with really believes in you as an artist and is going to push hard to get your work out there. And jumping at the first agent, I can absolutely appreciate being a young writer or other type of artist and going like, wow, this person wants me. I'm going to say yes. Um, but it could be to your detriment to not check around and know that this person is there for you. I say that about agents and managers as well. Anyone who you're going to be dealing with to be your voice, you need to make sure that they can actually represent you in an appropriate way. And that goes for lawyers too. Talk to if you're going and interviewing lawyers, make sure that they understand what's in here so they can communicate it properly to the other side and advocate for you properly. Let's
Yeah.
yeah, sorry.
No, I think
Go
that's
ahead.
really fair. And it's also like this person is taking a cut of your income and
Yes.
talking about you in rooms that you don't have access to. Like it's in a way a pretty weird system. It does feel kind of gatekeepery at times. And I ended up selling Long Island Girls directly to my publisher because my agent and I had parted ways by then. And I something you and I talk about a lot is like, do you need an agent? And I think I think it's a really interesting question. And the problem is it's the system. Like
Yep.
in theory, you shouldn't. But most publishers will not accept submissions from unagented authors.
Correct.
So it's like they're built in.
They are built in, and yeah, the reason you're able to push this one through is because of all of the doors that were open for you in the past. There's no question.
Right.
Um, but it's tough. I think the question of do you need an agent? The answer inevitably ends up becoming yes at some point.
Yeah.
Uh, I think the better question, which you and I have discussed, is do you need an agent right now? Is
Right.
is really the way to frame it. Because
Totally.
yeah, because there will be times where it just doesn't make sense and it's not necessary. You can go, wait, let's pause. I don't want to grow my team out. I don't want to focus on that. I want to focus on the internal stuff for now, and then maybe turn back to it in 6 months. But it is a huge part of it, and that goes for, folks in photography, it goes for directors, it goes for folks in the creator economy, like you name it. If you are outputting anything on the creative side, there are agents out there who want to sell for you and sell you, and figuring out those relationships are crucial. Let's talk about ghostwriting momentarily, because you mentioned that. How's that differ from writing your own work?
I mean, writing is writing. And what I like about ghostwriting is that it feels like the opportunity to work out the writing muscle while I'm not working on my own things. But when you're ghostwriting, it's somebody else's book and it's somebody else's voice. So it is a really interesting exercise because often when you're writing fiction for yourself, you're also trying not to write in your own voice. So it's like, I don't know. I really like ghostwriting. I think it's really fun. I think like what becomes complicated is like the politics of it, and the ethics of it, but it's been around forever. It's a really old practice, and I think it can be a great gig for authors who want to keep writing. And I kind of reached this point where I was like, okay, I could take a job at a marketing agency doing social media strategy, which I know I can do, or I could stay home and write for other people and it actually when I'm ghostwriting, I have a much easier time working on my own things because writing is a muscle and the more you use it, the easier it gets.
Yeah, and having known you for about a decade now, I know the stay home piece is a huge factor in your decision. So,
I don't
but
know what
but
you
maybe tell me a little bit about the politics and the ethics behind it, because as lawyers, Lorraine and I are always abutting ethical issues and making sure we're on the right side of it. But with something like ghostwriting, there's a lot more gray. I'd love to hear your thoughts there.
Yeah, I think the crediting is really tricky. When people buy a book from someone they admire, they want the fantasy that that person wrote it. Um, and they get pretty upset when they find out that's not true. So ghostwriters have all these different ways of signaling that they wrote the book without meddling in the fantasy. So one way is to be thanked first in the acknowledgments. Another way is maintaining permission to list it on your website. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's tricky. And, it's a question of like who has a right to tell what stories. Did you hire the right ghostwriter to tell this specific story? Does that person's identity have to match up with the story or with the author? Like, I think it does get really sticky. And my ghostwriting projects have been novels, which to me feels like even more of kind of like the Wild West, because traditionally people would just hire ghostwriters for memoirs, which makes a lot more sense because not everybody with a great life story is a writer. But that doesn't mean they don't have a great life story. And I think something interesting has happened, I think probably because of book talk, where novels are such commodities and people want the product to sell. And so people hiring ghostwriters for to write their novels is like a whole other thing.
Do you have to
It's
spend a lot of time with the authors and like get to know them and interview them to be able to like speak in their voice?
It depends how you define a lot of time. It doesn't take me that much time. But and a lot of it is like trial and error. Like you send them something and it either feels natural to them or it doesn't.
We have about 5, 10 minutes left. I'm going to keep asking you questions. Lauren is going to keep asking you questions. But if anyone in the audience has any burning questions for Gabrielle, write them in the chat, and we'll try to read them out before we're done. So that's your invitation now to start typing away. Let's talk about something that is very important to me in dealing with artists, and that's in building community. people think of writers and they think of someone who goes to a coffee shop and then goes home and doesn't talk to anybody for weeks at a time. How accurate is that? What does your world look like in terms of dealing with other writers and other folks in the space?
I would not survive if it wasn't for my literary community. And once I found literary community in Los Angeles, it was like my whole life opened up. And it's an interesting stereotype because I do think to be a good writer, you actually have to be really good at talking to people. Like your whole job is understanding people and being able to invent conversations. And so if you can't do that live, like I don't really understand how you're writing a book. But I was given the advice to just start showing up to author events. And the first one I went to, the person sitting in front of me turned around and she said, "Are you Gabrielle Korn?" And it was someone who had read my first book, but then it turned out that she was a queer novelist who lived down the street from me, and she has become one of my best friends in the city. And then it was like every time I went to something or went to something with her, I met more and more people. And so I've been in a number of writing groups. And really what it comes down to is like authors have to support each other. You cannot release a book into the void. And we talk a lot about like what it means to be a good literary citizen or a bad literary citizen. And usually it involves how much you help people who are coming through the door behind you. And if you are supporting their books, if you're willing to write blurbs, if you're willing to read a draft, go to events, it's like at this point to me, it really feels like a community effort to publish a book.
Did you figure that out through trial and error? Did you know that going into it?
I didn't know it with my first book, but it was the pandemic, so it didn't matter anyway. But when I was figuring out how to promote my first novel, Yours to the Taking, it was advice I got from my friend Lauren Sarand, who's this brilliant literary publicist. And we were doing a strategy call, and she was basically just like, you need to find your people. Um, like you need authors around you. Otherwise, like this isn't going to work. And it was the best advice I've ever gotten.
That's great. Not seeing any questions pop up in the chat. Lorraine, I know you had a few locked and loaded. You want to ask away?
Um, yes. So I guess like standing up or sorry, talking a little bit about like your book deals and everything, like how have you navigated certain contract negotiations and like what important provisions do you fight for in contracts and that maybe other writers should do the same thing?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like having you and Adam help with my last book contract was amazing. I admit that in the past I've just been so excited about getting a contract that I've been like, whatever you want, like I'll just let me sign it. Um, and it's always things I don't really understand where help comes in handy. But one thing that Adam caught in my last book contract was about my next book and what I could write about if I went to a different publisher and just making sure that the deal didn't like, cut me off from continuing to write novels if they didn't want my next book. So that was really important. And like, honestly, I feel like where I have found lawyers the most helpful is pointing out the worst case scenario, which I wouldn't think of because I don't have that as much experience. And so thinking about like, what does this language allow to happen that we want to prevent in contracts? But I mean, I really enjoyed watching what you guys asked for that was quietly taken out. I really appreciated that you tried to add first class travel for my book tour. That was nice.
First class travel, maybe a couple extra tickets for your lawyers. It never hurts to ask, but yeah, it's interesting dealing with large publishers and other major companies. And when we represent writers and other artists, we're coming at it from a perspective of having not the strongest bargaining position because you're one individual and the big company has got the force of millions of dollars behind them and a giant team. And so it's always interesting to push for the things that are going to affect you the most. And with that example you gave out of how would your next book be handled, it's such a small concern for the publisher that one of their authors goes and writes a book that maybe could be construed to be slightly competitive with the previous book, resulting in maybe, I don't know, a fewer sales 10 years from now, so whatever it looks like. But to you, that's your livelihood. And
Yeah.
I think putting that into perspective is massive. And to your other point of, yeah, when you're younger and you get a contract, you're willing to do anything. It's just about learning your value and knowing when to stand up. And sometimes hiding behind your lawyer is pretty helpful too, to just go, yeah, these two folks are going to yell for me, and I don't have to take on that burden, which is nice too. I can tell you, I certainly wouldn't mind having someone speak for me sometimes in some of
Yeah.
these negotiations,
Well,
especially
especially
when you're on counsel.
the
Yeah.
worst thing that can happen to you as a creative is being labeled difficult because
Yes.
once you get that reputation, you never shed it. And I love my publisher. I love my editor. The whole team has been so good to me. And so I'm very afraid of them thinking I'm difficult. So it is really nice to have a professional just speak up for you so that you can be, sweet.
Yes. Yes. And I will say, and this goes in particular for female artists and women that I've dealt with. Like, yes, getting labeled difficult could be a giant red mark on you. But at the same time, you have to know the difference between being considered difficult and just standing up for yourself and advocating for yourself. And learning that as an artist is crucial, because being expected to just take crap because someone's giving you the opportunity to do your job is never worth it. I think figuring out what's crucial for you and always pushing for those is absolutely important. But what you need to do as an artist is A, figure that out, but B, build a toolkit to communicate those things the appropriate way. Because there are ways to ask for things that will go so smoothly compared to asking for an identical thing in, I don't want to say an uncouth way, but in a way that maybe it just doesn't resonate with the publisher that you're dealing with. So I hate hearing the word difficult. I understand it's a nasty label. I want my clients to be difficult. I see them and like I'm like, when it's just Lorena, myself, and the client in a room, be difficult. Be that person. Lay it out on all out on the table, and then it's our job to either communicate that ourselves and we get to wear the black hat in that situation, or often what we do with some artists is teach you how to communicate it in a way that's productive, and gets across to the other side why these things are so important. We're going to end momentarily. Any parting words or thoughts you'd like to give to the audience, or maybe another plug for your upcoming book?
Well, actually, what I wanted to say is I feel like having a lawyer is what sets me apart from other creatives who are at the same level as me. I feel like extra prepared for challenges. In a different way, and I tell everybody to find a lawyer. Like after, I mean, you're obviously my friend, but we also work together professionally, and it's like I just think everybody needs an Adam, like in creative fields. So
Or
it's like,
Lorena,
or a
or
Lorena.
anybody else? Yeah.
Yeah, it's like it feels like the best thing I do for my career is have the two of you.
Well, I don't know what to say except thank you for that. I will say that knowing a lawyer costs nothing. If you are on this call because you're just thinking about legal issues that pop up as a writer or a journalist or anyone else in any of the spaces that we've been talking about, it never hurts to reach out to a lawyer and just say, hey, can I have a 15-minute chat to get to know you for when I do need your help? I know you're around. The toughest part of taking on new clients is not the toughest part, but the part that you really need to figure out quickly is getting to understand your clients as fast as possible, so you can dive into any situation with them and be on the same page. So I would say if you are working in a space where you're not sure if it makes sense to know a lawyer, assume that it is. Reach out to one. It doesn't have to be us, although obviously we'd be happy to chat, and leave it at that. But I will say, Gab, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you. It's been a huge privilege to see your career grow and take these interesting, fascinating paths over the last 9 years or so. And can't wait to keep helping you out over the next however many decades that we do this together. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Uh, for everyone who attended, thank you so much for attending, whether you are watching this on Zoom, LinkedIn, or later on YouTube. If you are watching this before the end of November, please note any lawyers, we will be actually putting on a CLE. I believe it's November 7th. We're going to be announcing that next week. We're also going to have another webinar lined up between now and the end of the month, which we will probably be announcing in the next week or two. As always, follow us on Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, YouTube. We'll be announcing a lot more things and events coming up. And thank you all for attending.